I never thought taking out the trash could feel like stepping into a trap. But that night changed everything. I opened the door, carrying the bag, and froze. There he was. Standing in the alley behind my building, leaning against the brick wall like he owned the night. His eyes caught mine before I even recognized the danger in him. I just knew, that if anyone saw this, my life would spiral. I should have screamed. I should have dropped the bag and ran, letting it spill across the cracked asphalt, letting my fear take over entirely. I should have let instinct take the wheel, should have abandoned all caution and sprinted back into the warmth and safety of my apartment, the familiar hum of my refrigerator and the faint glow of the living room lamp that always made me feel at least a little normal. But I didn't. I froze instead. My body locked in that strange, paralyzing mix of terror and disbelief, as though the very air around me had thickened into concrete, pressing down on my chest and trapping me in place. Every nerve was alive, buzzing, screaming at me to move, to escape, but my feet refused to obey. My hands shook uncontrollably, the kind of tremble that makes every thought scatter like leaves in the wind. I gripped the trash bag tighter, almost in a desperate attempt to anchor myself, but it did nothing. My fingers were trembling so badly that I could feel the plastic biting into my palms, and still I didn't let go. My heart hammered so loud, so erratically, that it was all I could hear. I could feel it in my throat, thumping against my Adam's apple in a painful rhythm, in my temples, a pulsing drum that seemed to echo through my skull, and even in the very tips of my fingers, a vibrating, tingling awareness that made me feel raw and exposed. It was the kind of pounding that seemed to echo in the empty alley, bouncing off the bricks, ricocheting in the shadows, like the world itself was holding its breath along with me. The silence around me amplified my fear, making it something almost tangible, like I could reach out and grasp it, twist it in my hands, and maybe, just maybe, have a chance at controlling it. But I knew I couldn't. The alley was narrow, lined with dumpsters and the occasional graffiti-scarred wall, damp from an earlier rain that had left the air heavy and smelled faintly of wet concrete and decay. Normally, I would have thought nothing of this smell, would have walked past it without a second glance, but now, every detail hit me like a hammer. The metallic tang of old rainwater pooled along the edges, the faint rotting smell of leftover trash mingling with the cold night air, the distant hum of a streetlight flickering somewhere beyond the alley's entrance. It all felt sharper, more immediate, because of him. Every sense I had, every instinct that had kept me cautious my entire life, was screaming at me to recognize him as a threat, but I couldn't even bring myself to move. Who are you? I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper, so soft it was almost swallowed by the night. The words sounded foreign even to me, small and fragile, like they belonged to a child rather than someone my age. My lips trembled as I spoke, and I was suddenly aware of how absurdly vulnerable I must have looked, clutching a garbage bag like a lifeline, standing in an alley I had walked past countless times and never noticed until now. The chill of the night air seeped through my thin jacket, curling along my spine and down my arms, but I barely noticed it. I was consumed entirely by him, by the presence that had just appeared out of nowhere, by the sense that something in my life had shifted and I wasn't sure I wanted it to shift, or maybe I did. I could feel my heart racing faster now, the rhythm irregular, like it was skipping beats and then compensating, slamming into my chest with every nervous thought. I could almost hear my own blood, like it had become amplified in the quiet, echoing against the walls of the alley, thumping in tandem with the fear that coiled in my stomach. My stomach clenched as if trying to hold all my panic and every shaky thought inside, threatening to expel it in one overwhelming surge. My breath came in shallow bursts, quick and uneven, and every exhale felt like it could give me away, reveal just how terrified I was, how completely frozen I had become. And then there was him. His presence. Not moving much, just standing there, and yet it was enough to make my pulse spike again. Calm, almost predatory, he radiated a stillness that was terrifying in its precision. Not the obvious kind of danger, the kind movies make, no raised weapons or aggressive posture, but a quiet, deliberate, focused stillness that made me hyper-aware of my own movements, my own breaths, my own beating heart. I could hear his boots scuff slightly on the gritty ground, faint enough that I had to strain to catch it, but I did, and it made me jump, made my stomach lurch as though the sound had physically touched me. Every tiny noise he made felt magnified, almost intimate, like the alley had become a stage and he was the only other actor, and I had no lines, no escape, nothing but the trembling recognition that this moment, right here, was all-consuming. My eyes traced him slowly, taking in the way he stood, the tilt of his head, the faint curl of his lips, the way his shoulders relaxed even as every other part of him screamed careful attention. There was an elegance to it, a precision in his posture that I couldn't explain. He was casual, but nothing about him was casual, not really. I could feel his focus, the way he measured the space between us, the silence, the shadows. I wanted to flinch. I wanted to run. I wanted to curl up into myself and disappear. But I didn't. My body was paralyzed, caught between the instinct to flee and the inexplicable pull that made me unable to turn away. I don't understand, I whispered, almost to myself. My fingers dug into the plastic bag, knuckles widening. My voice cracked as the words came out, betraying my fear and my confusion. He didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. The air between us carried weight, filled with the unspoken, with tension that made the alley feel smaller, tighter, like it was compressing around us. Every second that passed without a word was amplified, stretched, a slow, unbearable tension that made me aware of every small movement, the shift of his weight, the quiet scrape of boots against asphalt, the faint sound of a breeze stirring the edge of a nearby dumpster lid. I felt a strange mix of vulnerability and something else I couldn't name. Not desire, not yet, but a pull that was as magnetic as it was terrifying. A dangerous curiosity that made my pulse race even faster, that made the tremble in my hands feel almost exciting, like adrenaline coursing through my veins in a way that scared me and thrilled me at the same time. I hated that I noticed it. I hated that part of me wanted to stay, to see what would happen next, to risk whatever this was, even though everything inside me screamed that it was wrong. "Why you shouldn't be here," I managed to say, though my voice was weak, fragile, and quivering. I tried to infuse it with authority, tried to convince myself that I had control, that I wasn't completely undone by the simple act of his standing there. My chest rose and fell rapidly as I waited for him to move, for him to tell me to run, for anything that would let me return to the safety of my own life. But he didn't. He stayed. His gaze fixed on me, steady, unyielding, and in that moment, I felt something inside me tighten and unravel at the same time. The alley seemed to shrink around us, every shadow sharper, every corner more ominous. The faint sound of a dripping faucet in the distance, the occasional hum of a distant car engine, even the whisper of the wind through a nearby chain-link fence, it all became amplified, part of the soundtrack to my fear, my fascination, my inability to move. I could feel sweat prickling along my hairline, could feel the slight tremble in my legs, the unevenness of my breathing. And still, I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. I should have screamed. I should have run. Every rational thought screamed at me to flee. But I stayed. And in that dangerous, silent stillness, I realized something terrifying and undeniable. I was completely and utterly undone. Not by weapons, not by threats, not by words. But by him. By his presence, by the stillness that spoke louder than any scream, by the subtle, deliberate way he commanded attention without asking for it. The alley was narrow, but it felt infinite. The night seemed to stretch on forever, and yet every second was impossibly charged. My pulse raced. My hands shook. My heart hammered. And every instinct told me to run. And still, I didn't. He smiled then, slowly, deliberately. Not cruel, not kind, not the smile of someone who wants to charm or intimidate, but the kind of smile that made you painfully aware that you were being seen in a way that no one had ever truly seen you before. It wasn't warm. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't the practiced smile of someone attempting to reassure. And it wasn't the kind of threatening smile you see in movies or on the street, blatant, obvious, easy to prepare for. No. This smile was different. Subtle, deliberate, calibrated in ways I didn't understand but could feel deep in my bones. It was like he had been waiting for me, expecting me, anticipating this exact encounter in this exact alley at this exact moment. And the more I looked at him, the more my stomach twisted into knots I didn't know I had, coiling and uncoiling with a mix of fear, curiosity, and something dangerously close to fascination. Every instinct screamed that I should step back, that I should retreat into the shadows, that I should do anything to remove myself from this moment entirely. And yet, my feet were rooted to the cracked asphalt of the alley, as though the universe itself had anchored me there. I could feel the cold air sliding over my cheeks, brushing against my hair, but I hardly noticed. My focus was entirely on him, on the slow, deliberate curl of his lips, the subtle lift of his jaw, the way his eyes locked onto mine without wavering. I could feel my heart thudding in my chest, irregular, almost frantic, as if it was trying to warn me in Morse code: danger, intrigue, fascination, fear, desire. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said. His voice was low, quiet enough that it almost blended into the night, nearly swallowed by the subtle hum of the city beyond the alley. And yet, it vibrated with a presence that made it impossible to ignore. It wasn't loud or commanding in a conventional sense. There were no threats, no raised tones, no sharp inflections. But it had weight, a gravity that tugged at something deep inside me. The kind of voice that slides under your skin and burrows into some corner of your mind that you didn't even know existed, leaving a strange combination of warmth and warning in its wake. I could feel it in the hollow of my chest, in the tremble of my hands, in the way my legs threatened to give out beneath me, wobbling in rhythm with my pulse. My brain was screaming at me to run. Run. Now. Don't linger. Don't hesitate. Don't look at him. And yet, my body refused to listen. My lungs constricted. My throat went dry. Every fiber of me was caught between the desperate desire to flee and the terrifying curiosity that made me stay. And I stayed. I forced myself to laugh. It came out small, nervous, and far too high-pitched for my liking, like a squeak in the quiet night. It sounded less like a laugh and more like a wheeze, a sound my own ears barely recognized as mine. I wanted to normalize the moment somehow, to convince both him and myself that this was just a coincidence, that a stranger standing in an alley at midnight wasn't exactly the setup for every fear I had ever harbored. "I live here," I said, my voice catching halfway through. The words trembled along with my hands. My chest heaved ever so slightly, trying to steady itself against the rapid rhythm of my heartbeat. "This is my trash." The alley smelled faintly of wet concrete and trash, a smell that would normally make me wrinkle my nose or hurry past, but now it barely registered. Every sense I had was focused entirely on him. The subtle shift in his stance, the way his eyes narrowed just slightly as he regarded me, the faintest flare of his nostrils, every detail was magnified, etched into my memory in sharp, almost painful clarity. His eyebrow quirked upward ever so slightly, the smallest motion, almost imperceptible if I hadn't been hyper-aware, and it made my stomach flip entirely. The kind of flip that doesn't feel like butterflies, but like your insides have been yanked and twisted in ways you didn't know were possible. "Your trash?" he repeated, slower this time, as if tasting the words, as if trying to make sense of them in his own mind. There was a faint amusement there, a trace of curiosity that was almost playful, but it was tempered with something else, an edge I couldn't identify. A weight. A subtle gravity that suggested he knew more than he let on. More than I could understand. I opened my mouth, wanting to explain, to justify, to make sense of it all, but the words failed me. There was no answer I could give that wouldn't sound absurd. Who takes out the trash at midnight? Why would anyone care? Why had fate chosen this exact time, this exact place, this exact version of me, flustered, terrified, trembling with adrenaline, to confront someone I didn't even know? The way he looked at me made me feel suddenly small, like the alley had shrunk around us, like the night air pressed down heavier against my shoulders. Every ill-advised choice in my life, the mistakes I had made, the things I had ignored, the secrets I had hoped would remain buried, suddenly felt exposed, transparent, and illuminated under the weight of his gaze. He could undo everything about me with a single word, a single glance, a single movement. And yet, he didn't. He simply looked. The silence stretched between us, thick and potent, like it had mass. The kind of silence that doesn't encourage comfort, that doesn't allow for casual conversation or easy escape. Every heartbeat, every shallow breath, every small shiver that ran through my spine felt audible, almost like a declaration of my vulnerability. I could hear my blood pounding, a frantic drum echoing in my ears, drowning out the occasional hum of a distant streetlight, the faint rustle of leaves, the subtle movement of shadows along the alley walls. I wanted to speak, to break the tension, to normalize it somehow, but I didn't know what words could possibly do that. Every sentence I imagined sounded ridiculous, laughable, completely inadequate. Say something, anything. My inner voice urged me. Explain yourself. Explain why you're here. Explain why your heart is pounding and why your body refuses to leave. But when I opened my mouth, all that came out was a barely audible breath, a soft, nervous laugh that made me cringe even as it escaped. You live here? He said again, soft, deliberate, with a trace of disbelief that made my pulse tighten. At this hour? He didn't sound angry. He didn't sound mocking. He sounded curious, calculating. And it made my stomach twist again, a coil of apprehension and something darker I couldn't name. I felt the edge of his awareness pressing against mine, the weight of him like gravity, pulling me in despite the fear, despite the irrationality of it all. I shifted my weight slightly, trying to appear casual, though I knew it was a poor disguise. My hands tightened around the trash bag, the plastic crinkling faintly under my grip, and I felt a sudden self-consciousness about the bag itself. What a strange, insignificant object to anchor me in such a moment. And yet, it grounded me. At least it was something real, something I could hold on to while the rest of the world, or this man, seemed to blur around the edges. His gaze didn't waver. Every nuance of my movements, every micro-expression, every flicker of hesitation in my eyes, he seemed to notice. I felt exposed, entirely, as if all the protective layers I had built around myself had been stripped away in a single look. There was no pretense here, no need to impress, no small talk. Just him. And me. And the overwhelming, electric tension that threaded itself through the space between us. A shiver ran down my spine. My breath hitched. I wanted to step back, to release the bag, to run, yet I found myself frozen, held in place by some invisible force I couldn't name. My heart was a frantic, irregular drum echoing in the alley, in my chest, in my temples. And he watched, unblinking, deliberate, waiting, measuring, and somehow, that made everything feel both terrifying and compelling all at once. Your trash? He asked again, slow, measured, his tone carrying a strange mix of incredulity and amusement, a trace of something else I couldn't quite place. Patience. Precision. Power. All wrapped into one small, deliberate phrasing. My mouth opened instinctively, wanting to respond, but the words stuck somewhere between my throat and the tremble in my chest. Who explains midnight garbage to a stranger who looks like he could unravel you with a glance? What words could possibly matter here? And I realized, in a dizzying, stomach-turning way, that none of this, the bag, the alley, the midnight hour, mattered. Not really. It was just a backdrop for him noticing me, seeing me, acknowledging me in a way that made every illogical choice in my life suddenly seem predestined. My chest tightened with a mixture of fear, awe, and something dangerously like longing. I wanted to hate him. I wanted that sharp, clean kind of fear, the kind that snaps you into action, that gives you clarity instead of confusion. I wanted to feel it fully, let it flood my system, let it take control of my legs and force them to move. I wanted to turn on my heel and run, to feel the sting in my lungs as I sprinted back toward the safety of my building, to slam my door behind me so hard the walls shook, to lock it, double-check it, lean against it while my heart tried to beat its way out of my chest. I wanted to tell myself later, with shaking hands and a racing pulse, that was close. That could have been bad. I'm glad I listened to my instincts. My rational mind screamed at me to do exactly that. It was loud, frantic, relentless. Get out. Run. Forget this. This is how bad things start. This is how people disappear. Every logical part of me lined up with evidence I couldn't ignore, the empty alley, the late hour, the stranger who appeared too calm, too aware, too unbothered by the fact that he had startled me half out of my skin. He's dangerous, my thoughts insisted. Not in an obvious way, not with raised fists or shouted threats, but in the quieter, more insidious way. The kind of danger that doesn't announce itself. The kind that waits. And yet, something in me didn't move. My legs didn't obey the command to flee. They felt rooted to the ground, heavy, unresponsive, like they belonged to someone else entirely. The instinct to run, so deeply ingrained, so primal, was there, vibrating under my skin, but it was overpowered by something else. Something stranger. Something I didn't want to name because naming it would make it real. A pull. A draw. A curiosity that felt almost reckless in its intensity. I couldn't explain it. Not to myself. Not if my life depended on it. I searched my mind for a reason, any reason, that would justify why I was still standing there, why I hadn't taken a single step backward. Shock, maybe. Adrenaline. The freeze response people talk about when fear overwhelms the system. That explanation would have been comforting. Clinical. Safe. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like choice. There was something magnetic about him, something that bent the air around us, that shifted the balance of the moment without a single word. It was as if gravity itself had recalibrated, pulling me forward despite every warning light flashing in my head. Despite the way my pulse throbbed in my ears. Despite the tightness in my chest that made it hard to take a full breath. I hated that part of myself in that moment. The part that stayed. The part that leaned into the tension instead of recoiling from it. The part that whispered, just a second longer. Just understand this. Just look. Because when I looked at him, really looked, I felt something unsettling settle into my bones. I felt seen. Not the surface level kind of being seen. Not the casual glances people give you in passing, or the polite attention they offer when conversation demands it. This was deeper. Sharper. It cut through me in a way that made my throat tighten unexpectedly. I hadn't felt it in years. Maybe ever. It was as if he saw past the layers I had so carefully assembled over time, the makeup I used like armor, the practiced expressions, the version of myself I presented because it was easier, safer, more acceptable. He didn't see the performance. He saw whatever was underneath it. And that terrified me. In that instant, it was just the two of us. The world seemed to recede, as if someone had turned down the volume on reality. The alley stretched up behind him, dark and narrow, the cold concrete biting faintly through the soles of my shoes. The night air hung heavy, cool against my skin, carrying distant city sounds that felt strangely muted. Everything beyond him blurred, softened, faded into something indistinct, like a fog creeping in from the edges of my vision. All that remained was the harsh clarity of his gaze, and my own startled reflection in it. I had the uncanny sensation that if I moved, if I blinked too long, the moment would snap, like a thread pulled too tight. That whatever fragile equilibrium existed between us would shatter. And I didn't know whether that would be a relief or a loss. It felt like someone had peeled back my skin and looked straight at my soul. The vulnerability of it made my stomach clench. My first instinct was to recoil from that feeling, to protect myself, to rebuild the walls that had taken me years to construct. Those walls existed for a reason. They kept me functional. They kept me safe. They kept people at a manageable distance. But alongside the fear was something else, something dangerously intoxicating. To be seen like that. To be recognized without explanation. To feel, just for a split second, that someone understood the shape of your loneliness without you having to confess it aloud. My chest tightened further, a constriction that made every breath feel shallow. I became acutely aware of my own body, of the way my shoulders were slightly hunched, of how my fingers were gripping the trash bag too tightly. The plastic dug into my skin, crinkling softly under the pressure, grounding me in something physical, something mundane. I clung to it like a lifeline, even though I knew it wouldn't protect me from anything. My knuckles felt stiff, my palms damp. If I loosened my grip, I was afraid my hands would betray me completely and start shaking again. I didn't want him to see that. I didn't want to give him that kind of power. And yet, I suspected he already knew. I caught the faintest trace of his scent then, a subtle, musky hint of cologne that lingered in the air between us. It wasn't overpowering. It didn't announce itself. It was restrained, controlled, like everything else about him. The kind of scent that didn't demand attention but earned it. It wrapped itself around my senses quietly, weaving into the tension already coiled in my chest. It shouldn't have mattered. And yet it did. The stillness of the alley amplified everything. Every sound felt louder than it should have been, sharper, more deliberate. The distant hum of traffic. The soft buzz of a flickering streetlight somewhere behind me. My own breathing, uneven and embarrassingly audible in the silence. Then there was the faint scrape as he shifted his weight. It was barely a sound at all. Just the subtle movement of his boot against concrete. But my ears caught it instantly, my nerves firing like tripwires. My heart jumped, skipping a beat before resuming its frantic rhythm. I tracked the movement without meaning to, my gaze flickering downward and back up again, cataloging the change as if my life depended on it. Every movement he made felt deliberate, measured. Nothing wasted. Nothing accidental. Even his stillness felt intentional, like a predator conserving energy, watching, assessing. The thought sent a shiver through me, equal parts fear and fascination. I wondered, briefly, if he could hear my heart pounding. If he could see the way my chest rose and fell too quickly. If he noticed the slight tremor in my fingers despite my efforts to keep them steady. I wondered what he saw when he looked at me. Not the version of myself I showed the world, but the real one, the tired one, the guarded one, the one who had learned the hard way how easily trust could be weaponized. The one who had been invisible for so long that being noticed now felt almost painful. I wanted to hate him for that. For making me feel exposed. For making me feel drawn in. For standing there, saying nothing, doing nothing, and still managing to unravel me piece by piece. And yet, even as my rational mind continued to scream warnings, even as my body remained taut with tension, I couldn't deny the truth pressing against my ribs. I didn't want to look away. I didn't want to leave. And that realization scared me more than anything else in that alley ever could. I didn't know then that he was dangerous in the ways that mattered, the kind of danger you don't see coming. Not the obvious threats like guns or knives, but the way someone could slip into your life and rearrange it without warning. The kind that sneaks in through quiet moments, subtle touches, small words that lodge themselves in your memory. The kind of danger that makes you ache for it, that makes your blood run hot and your mind spin, that leaves you both terrified and craving more. I watched him, and 1,000 thoughts collided in my head. Who is he? Why is he here? What does he want? I tried to search his face for clues, there were none, or maybe there were too many. He looked calm, unruffled, but I sensed the careful calculation behind every movement. Every tilt of his head, every slight curl of his lips, every pause in his breathing, it all felt deliberate, and it terrified me. I don't know why you're here, I said, my voice shaky, attempting to reclaim some control over the situation. I'm not, this isn't, I trailed off, words failing me completely. He didn't respond immediately. He just looked at me, and the weight of that gaze was heavy, like he could see every lie I'd ever told, every insecurity I tried to hide, every little fear that had shaped me. I could feel him measuring me, understanding me in ways I hadn't understood myself. And yet, in that understanding, there was no judgment, just a quiet, unnerving intensity. Finally, he spoke, low and deliberate. You shouldn't be afraid, he said. Not of me. Not yet. There was a pause, heavy with meaning, and I swallowed hard. I wanted to ask yet what? But my throat went dry, and no sound would come. The silence between us stretched, long and thick, filled with the unspoken. I laughed nervously again, a hollow sound that did nothing to hide the fear curling in my stomach. I guess I'm not very good at this, I admitted. Talking to strangers. Midnight strangers. People who appear out of nowhere. He tilted his head, just slightly, and that subtle motion made my heart skip again. You're not just talking to a stranger, he said softly, almost to himself, almost like a confession. The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. There was weight in his words, a truth I couldn't quite grasp, but I felt it resonate deep in my chest. For a long moment, we stood there, the alley silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves, the faint hum of distant traffic, the uneven breathing between us. I could feel my pulse hammering, my legs trembling, my fingers clutching the bag as if it could anchor me to reality. I wanted to move. I wanted to retreat. And yet, something kept me rooted in place, glued by curiosity, fear, and the strange, magnetic pull of his presence. He took a step closer, and my stomach lurched. Not threateningly, not aggressively, but deliberately, in a way that made the air between us electric. I wanted to flinch. I wanted to back up. And yet I didn't. My body betrayed me, frozen in the spot where the dark alley seemed to shrink around us, closing in, pressing me closer to him whether I wanted it or not. I shouldn't be here, I whispered again, more to convince myself than him. My hands shook visibly now, the bag trembling in my grip. My voice was low, wavering, and I could feel the raw honesty spilling out of me in a way I hadn't allowed in years. He didn't respond immediately. He simply studied me, his gaze unblinking, patient, terrifyingly calm. And then he said something I'll never forget: you don't get to decide who shows up in your life, not always. Sometimes, life decides for you. The weight of that statement hung in the air like a storm about to break. My stomach flipped, a combination of fear and something else I couldn't name. Anticipation? Dread? A strange, thrilling longing that made every nerve in my body tingle. I wanted to hate him, wanted to curse him, wanted to tell him to leave and never come back. And yet I couldn't. I felt him. I felt him in a way I had never felt anyone before. I glanced around the alley, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. How vulnerable. How entirely at his mercy. My mind raced through 1,000 possibilities. Should I run? Should I scream? Should I pretend this never happened? But every instinct screamed at me to stay, to see what this was, to understand why he made me feel like my heart could both shatter and soar in the same moment. He smiled faintly again, just a twitch of the lips, and it was enough to make my knees weak. You're trembling, he observed quietly. I know, I admitted, my voice barely audible, betraying the terror and the strange, undeniable pull I felt toward him. I can't explain it. You don't have to, he said, and even those simple words, gentle as they were, sent a jolt through me. My chest tightened, my hands gripped the bag as though holding onto it could keep me grounded, and yet I felt more unmoored than ever. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream at him for appearing out of nowhere, for making my heart race, for making me feel exposed in ways I hadn't felt in years. But instead, I found myself rooted to the spot, heart hammering, unable to look away, unable to move, unable to reconcile the fear with the pull, the danger with the strange, terrifying magnetism that drew me to him. I didn't know then that the danger he carried wasn't the kind you could see. It wasn't weapons, or threats, or obvious harm. It was subtler, insidious, intoxicating. It was the way he made me feel alive and small at the same time. The way he made my chest ache with longing. The way he made me aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every trembling thought. The kind of danger that leaves scars you can't see, but feel every second. I could feel it in every glance he gave me, every shift of weight, every faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I knew, somewhere deep down, that meeting him here, in this quiet, midnight alley, was going to change everything. That my life, mundane, predictable, safe, was about to tilt, teeter, and maybe even collapse entirely. And yet, I stayed. I couldn't move. I didn't know then that standing frozen, clutching my trash bag, staring at him under the dim glow of the alley light, was the first step into a world I didn't understand, a world that would make my heart ache and soar and break, all at the same time. And I couldn't have turned away even if I wanted to. Over the next few weeks, I kept seeing him, always by accident. Or at least that's what I told myself. I would convince myself that it was coincidence, that the universe was just cruelly ironic, that maybe my mind was playing tricks, creating patterns where none existed. But the truth was undeniable. He was everywhere I went. Not in an obvious, glaring way, not like he was following me, but subtle, quiet, like a shadow stretching just beyond the edge of my vision. I caught him outside my favorite cafe one Tuesday afternoon. I had gone there for a quick coffee and a moment of normalcy, hoping to escape the swirl of my own restless thoughts. I laughed with a friend, light, careless, the kind of laugh I hadn't given myself permission to have in months. And there he was, leaning against the brick wall, his jacket casually draped, one foot crossed over the other, sipping coffee from a paper cup. He didn't move, didn't call my name. He simply watched. And the moment our eyes met, something inside me twisted painfully. Jealousy. I didn't even want to admit it to myself. Why did it matter that he was there? Why did it feel like he had invaded a space that was mine, that had been mine long before he existed? And yet, beneath the irritation, beneath the prickling awareness of him watching me, there was something else. A pull I couldn't name. My stomach tightened, my pulse jumped, my heart beat a little faster just knowing he was nearby. I tried to look away, to laugh more loudly at my friend's joke, to pretend that his presence didn't make my chest ache in a way that made me dizzy. But I couldn't. It wasn't just that he was watching. It was that he knew I was being watched. That he understood the effect he had without having to say a word. I felt exposed, raw in ways I wasn't used to. Vulnerable. And somewhere in that vulnerability, somewhere in the slow burn of tension, I realized that I wanted him to see me like that. Then came the night he knocked on my door. I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I wanted him. And yet, when I saw him standing there, framed in the dim hallway light, all my resolve crumbled. His presence filled the small apartment, the air thick with anticipation and the faint scent of his cologne, a sharp, clean smell that lingered long after he stepped inside. "You shouldn't be here," I whispered, trying to sound brave, trying to convince myself that my voice carried authority. But it cracked halfway through, a betraying tremor that made me sound smaller than I felt, less certain, more fragile. I wanted him gone, wanted to slam the door and return to the safety of my solitude. But something in the way he looked at me, the soft but unwavering intensity of his gaze, made my resolve collapse. "I had to make sure you were safe," he said. His words were calm, deliberate, and even though a part of me screamed "this is wrong, stay away," I believed him. Every fiber of my being wanted to argue, to push him out, to scream at him for stepping into my life in a way that should have been forbidden. And yet, I couldn't. Because even as my rational mind fought him, my heart whispered a quiet, dangerous truth: I needed him. We began these dangerous dances. Small moments at first, seemingly innocent, yet laced with tension that made my chest ache. Stolen glances across dimly lit streets when we knew the world wasn't watching, casual touches that lingered just a little too long, conversations that felt like confessions without words. It was reckless, thrilling, terrifying. And I hated myself for wanting it. Hated how much I wanted him. My thoughts drifted to him at the most inconvenient times. During meetings at work, I would catch myself imagining the curve of his smile, the tilt of his head, the intensity of his gaze. In the shower, I could smell him in my mind, the way his cologne would cling to him, sharp and clean, leaving invisible traces that made my skin tingle. In the quiet spaces between breaths, in the moments I tried to tell myself I was fine, I felt his presence everywhere. And every time he said my name, whether in person or in memory, it was like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed. I felt exposed, fragile, alive in ways I hadn't known I could feel. And then I found the truth. I shouldn't have, but curiosity gnawed at me like a hunger I couldn't resist. Something in me needed to know, needed to confront the shadow he carried, the secrets that his eyes hinted at but his lips refused to speak. One night, I followed him. Keeping to the shadows, every step calculated, every breath measured. My chest tightened, each heartbeat a drumbeat in my ears, loud and erratic, as though it were warning me of the danger I was courting. I watched him enter a building I had only ever heard whispers about, the kind people said you didn't ask questions about, the kind you stayed away from if you valued your safety. My stomach twisted painfully as I realized the magnitude of what I had just discovered. The Mafia boss. The man who should not exist in my small, mundane life. The man I had been thinking about, dreaming about, fearing and longing for, every waking hour. The realization hit me like a cold slap, my chest constricting, my hands trembling as I stepped back into the shadows. My mind raced with conflicting emotions, fear, disbelief, betrayal, and an undeniable pull that made my stomach churn with a dangerous thrill. How could I have been so blind? And yet, why did I still want him? The next day, I confronted him. I had to. I couldn't pretend I didn't know. My voice broke as I demanded answers, a mixture of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak coursing through every word. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, tears threatening to spill, frustration and longing fighting for dominance in my chest. He didn't dodge the question. He met my gaze with eyes heavy, unreadable, full of things I couldn't name, things that should have terrified me but somehow didn't. I couldn't. Not yet, he said, voice low, measured, deliberate. I needed to protect you, from them, from me, from everything. The weight of his words hung between us like a physical presence. I wanted to scream, to run, to tell him that protection didn't excuse deception, that honesty was everything. But I couldn't. Because even as my anger flared, even as my trust wavered, my heart twisted painfully in ways I couldn't articulate. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to turn and leave, to retreat into the safety of my familiar life. But the pull, the connection, the intensity of his presence, it held me fast, rooted in place like a tree in a storm. I felt vulnerable in a way I hadn't in years, and that vulnerability was terrifying, intoxicating, and impossible to resist. My mind raced with questions. Why him? Why now? Why can't I walk away? Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee the danger he represented, to escape before I let myself fall entirely. But something deeper, older, stronger than my fear whispered that I was already too far gone. That this was a path I had no choice but to follow, whether it ended in heartbreak or something I couldn't yet imagine. We stood there, in the small apartment, in the quiet aftermath of revelation. The air felt thick, charged, almost electric. Every glance, every subtle shift in posture, every fleeting breath seemed amplified, as if the room itself were conspiring to hold us in this tense, fragile moment. And I realized, with a strange, piercing clarity, that the danger he carried wasn't in the obvious weapons or the whispers of power, it was in the way he made me feel alive, exposed, trembling, and awake all at once. And I knew, deep down, that nothing would ever feel the same again. That even as fear coiled around my chest, even as doubt clawed at my mind, even as reality threatened to remind me of the impossible odds against us, I couldn't walk away. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shove him away and lock the door, to retreat into the quiet safety of my apartment and pretend none of this had ever happened. Every rational part of me shouted that staying was dangerous, that every heartbeat I gave him was another step closer to ruin. And yet, I wanted to stay. My body defied logic, refusing to obey the commands of my mind. Because every time he touched my hand, gentle but deliberate, I felt the warmth of him bleed through my own skin, threading its way into my chest, making my pulse catch. Every time he leaned close just long enough for my hair to brush against his chest, a simple, accidental intimacy, I felt like I was home. Like this dangerous, forbidden life, this man who should have been untouchable, was the only place that made me feel real. Even if that home was dangerous. Even if it could kill me. Every instinct I had screamed that he was a storm I shouldn't be standing in, but I stood anyway. I craved the storm. I craved the way he made me tremble without touching me, the way a look or a tilt of his head could turn my stomach into a whirlwind of longing and fear. I hated that I wanted it, hated that it made me feel alive, hated that it was intoxicating. And still, I stayed. We drifted. We fought. We broke in ways that left me trembling, curled up on my sofa with the apartment dark and silent, the only sound the whisper of the city outside. The night pressed against the windows like it was trying to warn me, or maybe mock me, wrapping itself around me in shadows that felt almost like fingers. I hated him. Every ounce of me wanted to scream at him for the power he held over my emotions, for the way he could unearth parts of me I had hidden even from myself. But then, in the next moment, I loved him. Every fleeting smile, every soft glance, every brush of fingertips across mine broke down defenses I had spent a lifetime building. I wanted to hate him more than anything, but my heart refused to listen. I remember one night, sitting on the edge of my bed, clutching my knees to my chest, the moonlight slicing through the blinds in sharp lines across the floor. I could still feel the memory of his hand brushing against mine on the staircase. I told myself over and over, he's dangerous. He's everything you shouldn't want. And yet, I imagined him there beside me anyway, imagined his presence filling the room, imagined the warmth of his chest against my cheek, the weight of him as an anchor in a world that often felt like it was spinning too fast. My stomach clenched at the thought, and I hated myself for wanting him more than I hated the fear. Weeks later, when everything seemed lost, when the silence had stretched too long, and the absence felt like a physical ache in my chest, he appeared at my door. I froze the second I saw him, soaked in rain, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes dark and torn, as if the world itself had left a mark on him that only I could see. The rain dripped from the edges of his jacket and pooled silently on the doorstep. My chest tightened, breath catching in my throat. "I can't lose you," he said, voice raw and unsteady in a way I had never heard before. And something inside me, the part one had tried to bury under logic, fear, and endless rationalization, broke. I opened the door, hands shaking, unable to resist the pull that had been weaving itself through my life for weeks, months, maybe longer. I let him in. We didn't speak much that night. Words were unnecessary, almost fragile in the wake of the storm that had passed between us. Silence carried a weight, a language all its own. His arms around me were the only anchor I had ever known, the only safe place in a world that had suddenly become sharp-edged and frightening. I buried my face into his chest, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne, the scent that lingered on my skin long after he had left, and it felt like breathing for the first time in years. We stayed that way for hours, wrapped in the quiet intimacy of a storm we had both survived but never named. Every heartbeat echoed against the other, every tremor of my hands was mirrored in his embrace. I felt both fragile and unshakably strong at the same time. It was terrifying and tender in equal measure. And I realized, with a strange, twisting clarity, that love could exist in terror just as easily as in safety. That someone who shouldn't exist in my life could become the only person who mattered. That longing and heartbreak, desire and fear, could coexist and carve out something sharper, brighter, stronger than either of us alone. I had never felt more alive. Every small gesture, every glance, every whisper of his breath against my hair, reminded me how dangerous love could be, and how necessary. My mind spun with memories of all the nights I had spent pacing, wondering if this was worth it, wondering if the ache I felt was simply a trap. And now, feeling him close, I knew that the ache was not a trap, it was life itself, real and raw and unsparing. I remember standing by the window once that night, watching the rain smear across the glass in uneven streaks. The city was quiet, distant, and my reflection in the glass was caught between the shadows and the soft light of his presence behind me. I could feel the tension in my shoulders begin to ease, just a fraction, because I knew that no matter what storms came, this moment, this closeness, was ours. Fragile, yes. Dangerous, yes. But real. Now, when I look back, I remember that night with the trash bag. I remember the alley, narrow and empty, the warm midnight air heavy against my skin, the faint rustle of leaves carried by the wind. I remember the flash of his eyes, the weight of him, the presence that seemed to fill every inch of space while leaving the world outside untouched. I remember the smell of his cologne, the heat of his glance, the trembling curiosity that had rooted me to the spot and refused to let me go. I remember fear, the sharp, visceral kind that made my stomach knot and my knees weak, and the inexplicable, undeniable longing that had taken root in the same moment. I remember how it felt to be pulled between extremes, to feel both terror and safety, heartbreak and desire, hesitation and surrender all at once. I remember that feeling of being completely seen for the first time in years, of someone recognizing me, not the mask I wore for the world, not the careful defenses I built to hide every flaw, but me. All of me, trembling and fragile, but alive. And I know one thing, some love is worth the danger. Some hearts are worth breaking, and being broken for. The ache, the risk, the fear, they were nothing compared to the gravity of what I felt, nothing compared to the pull that had drawn me in and refused to let me go. That night, and every night after, I chose him. Chose the risk, chose the storm, chose the love that had been terrifying and tender all at once. And in that choice, I found something I had never known before, the courage to let myself feel, completely and without apology, the dangerous, intoxicating, all-consuming pull of a heart that mattered more than my own.